Good morning. It's Thursday, 5th of June, and this is our first video on fertility. There are two or three things I'd like to do today with this video. I'd like to go back to the syllabus for a couple of things. One, to look at the equation that we are going to be doing in this course, and to emphasize the discussion. And then I'd like to take you on a little bit of a walk through the readings that we have assigned for fertility, including Weeks and Coale, Bongaarts, Henry, and Frisbee. So now remember that what we're doing is our basic equation is the variation in formal demography, and how is that variation explained by, shall we say, social demography. So that the formal demography that we've encountered already in fertility is total fertility rates, the average number of children in a population of women, and per woman, and the age-specific fertility rates. And we have those for our two comparison countries. One of them for all of us is US of A, and then the comparison country that you're choosing, and choosing it from looking at the population pyramids on the international database at the U.S. Census, because how we want to do this is we can see the more leaf-shaped pyramid of the United States, and what we're looking for is a population pyramid that looks more like this, which, hard to get my angle right here, that has a broad base indicating high fertility and a narrow, highly eroded side of the population pyramid, meaning a high mortality rate or a high mortality experience that erodes that. Remember, the basic idea here is if everybody that was born lived to, say, 100, it would be a rectangle. It wouldn't be a pyramid. So what creates that pyramid is the mortality experience of that population. So a good way, quick and easy, to take a look at the demographic transition is the imagery of a population pyramid. So pick your country by scrolling down through all those countries on the international database, U.S. Census, and find a population pyramid that looks like this. I think so far we have Thornton has Uganda, Adams has Angola, Lopez has Guatemala, and Presley has Nigeria. So these are very peaked. Very highly eroded, at least compared to the U.S. All right, so what we're going to be doing then, the rates that represent the side of the pyramid, the mortality rates, and which we'll get to in a month or so, and the fertility rates that represent the base of the pyramid, that is again, we can look at that pyramid as an expression of formal demography. How the rates of mortality and fertility are interacting to create that unique pyramidical feature of a particular population. So it's a good image to keep in mind and a good image to use for selecting your comparison country. Now, one of the things we want to be doing as we're moving into the more formal side, formal not in the sense of formal demography, but that too, more into the exercises of the course, fertility being the first one, is we want to think about, as we look at these total fertility rates and the age-specific fertility rates, what is on the formal demography side, what is happening on the right-hand side of the equation, the social demographic side. And we'll use the readings of Weeks. He's got a very extensive chapter, a very good chapter, on fertility, I think. And then those 3 or 4 core articles that I'm asking you to read, and 3 of them, like I mentioned in the email yesterday, Weeks provides some summary. He also sees them, as most any demographer would, as 3 critical articles for understanding demographic processes, particularly in the area of fertility. Okay, so when we look at the formal equation that I put out, to keep using that word formal, so we'll just have to remember there's got numerous different kinds of ideas or definitions. We're looking at y equals xi plus wi plus zi, reading from the first page of the syllabus. The y, the variation in the y, that's say the total fertility rate from one country to another, or from one population within a country to another, or one age group of women to another age group within a country. What is explaining that variation in y? What explains the variation in total fertility? And so we move to the right-hand side of the equation, and we look at maybe age of mother, education of mother, maybe we look at race and ethnic differences, and we look at place. Place being maybe socioeconomic development, maybe the proximity of a country where you've got some internal dynamic that promotes, say, lower fertility, or a country that's nearby, maybe just across the border from a low fertility country where ideational diffusion begins to permeate, goes across that permeable border, and people get the idea, wow, you know, we could have lower fertility, and it's not necessarily driven by socioeconomic change. Yesterday I gave that illustration to you of Brazil, and Brazil putting the power lines out into the northeast, and villages maybe pooling their resources to buy a TV, and watching a TV. And very popular some years ago when I was up at the Pop Center up at UT was Married with Children, in Portuguese, dubbed in Portuguese, and people could see Married with Children, few children, refrigerator, few children, bigger house, few children, all this. They began seeing that there is a way that at some point in their lives where they will disinvest in children. In other words, they will begin to invest in the kinds of things that will improve the lot of themselves and their children, and one way they might do that is having fewer children. But there again, we were talking about, we'll look more about this next week, where the household income in a lot of rural agricultural areas around the world, household income, a significant feature of that, or contribution to that, is the work that children do in the fields. So when that is no longer seen as something essential, then the household income becomes dedicated to the education and training of children, rather than having children in order to bring wealth into the household. So anyway, y equals xi plus wi plus zi captured in our formal demography equals social demography. All right, now I want to say something about discussion. Do not be absent from discussion. I mentioned in an email yesterday, 20% of the final grade is your participation in discussion. This is our virtual seminar, the discussion. It's not like we can see one another face to face and arm wrestle and harangue one another in real time in a synchronistic way, but it is what we have available on Blackboard, and it's vital that we have those conversations. You may think, well, what am I going to make a contribution of as a trained demographer? I'm not a trained demographer. Well, but you are getting training in this course, and you do have insights. You have intuition, and you'll build on that by the readings, and you'll get some ideas about how to respond, especially when you begin looking at the difference between your comparison country and the USA. So get into the discussion, and it is 20% of your final grade. If you do not participate in the discussion, you know, the best you could make in the course on an overall score of 100 is an 80. So that would be a low B. So get in the discussion. I have provided you a bit of a rubric, which I'm looking for here, on page 4 of the syllabus. There are several bullets there. One thing I want to say, don't summarize chapters. Everybody can summarize a chapter, making notes as you read a chapter, or highlighting, or however you do that. Don't summarize a chapter, but take the information from a chapter and address the theme that I have put in there, or take an issue out of the chapter that is of interest to you and post it yourself as a theme in the discussion. Well, you know, I found this to be very interesting, how Bongaarts talks about spacing of children that comes from breastfeeding. In breastfeeding countries, fertility is somewhat less than it would be if in countries that were not breastfeeding. So if you have an idea, then post it. So you can see, making engaging comments about the readings, engaging comments that relate to the readings to your demographic study. What are you seeing that's helping you to understand what's going on in Nigeria or the USA? And don't just echo what somebody else says or the readings or other students, but put some original ideas out there. I mean, you can comment and say, well, I agree with that. But say why you do agree with it. Support your statements with evidence and logic. Now, there's always some things that are seem out there in kind of a I won't say outrageous, but in a way they're outrageous. Not outrageous in a negative sense, but outside the ballpark perspectives. Those are very valuable perspectives. Don't feel like you're constrained by the readings. You may have something that is your own intuition or something that you read somewhere else. A lot of things having to do with fertility, as you know, particularly adolescence fertility, are hot button items in our country, and there's a lot of public literature out there in newspapers and magazines. Stay away from opinions. We don't want opinions. You know, well, I think it should be this, and I don't know why it's that. Don't do that. State your position, use your evidence, and that sort of thing, and be logical. And now, of course, it's going to happen that we don't agree on something. One or the other of you won't agree on that, and so that's just a matter of being civil and say, well, I like your point, but then I don't like it either, and this is why I don't like it, or whatever, but be polite about it, and that sort of thing. Remember, this is like being around a seminar table. This is our opportunity as graduate students that we don't have it. The ideal setting in most, historically in graduate programs that are not online, the 9 or 10 of us in this course would be sitting around an oval seminar table and going at one another for 3 hours. That's the way my seminars were when I was in graduate school. We'd get together at 9 o'clock in the morning on a particular theme and talk for 3 hours straight. So we can't do that so much here, but it's just to highlight the importance of discussion. Don't be absent from discussion. Let's take a look for a moment at the readings. Yesterday in the email, I highlighted what I thought was a key point from each of those 3 articles, Coale, Henry, and Bongaarts. The Coale article, Weeks does a good summary, but read the whole article. I mean, you don't have to scan it. There's some statistics in there. I mean, just scan it. You don't have to read it thoroughly. Get a sense of what Coale's coming from, unfiltered by either me or Weeks. The light seems to be changing as I look on this thing, but anyway, we'll make it work. The calculus of choice is important. The idea is that probably, in most cases, if a couple had an opportunity to have lower fertility, they would. In other words, if they had contraception available to them, not just the rhythm method, but if they had contraception available to them, then they might choose to use that. Other things being equal, of course, and other things are not always equal. They may be in a spiritual, contextual, say, social spiritual context, or even with contraception, they would not, they would not use it. But the point of it is that they have the calculus of choice. They can choose. They can see it and say, no, we're not going to do that. But until methodologies of contraception are available, that calculus doesn't exist. And Coale has a good conversation about that. And so take a look. You may find that in Afghanistan, for example, where that peak is like this, there's no calculus of choice available to those couples. They don't choose contraception. But they can't choose contraception because it's not available. Not that they would, but at least they don't have the, if it's not available, they don't have that choice. So explore that in your mind and think about that. The other is Bongaarts. He's got, actually there is a, on page 223 and 222 of the text, Weeks does a good thing on proximate determinants of fertility, a good summary. And that table 6.1 lays out quite a bit of the article or argument of Bongaarts as it's sort of filtered through Kingsley Davis and Judith Blake. It's a nice summary of that table. These are more almost like biological social proximate determinants as than social contextual. Factors affecting exposure to intercourse, affecting exposure to conception, and to gestation, the 3 categories that Bongaarts talks about. We can imagine, when you look at a table like this, and then you've got your country of comparison, you can imagine, filter how you see your country through that table, and imagine what kind of biological proximate determinants are operating in your country of choice. Imagine that. And then when you look on page 222, there are a couple of, about the middle of the last paragraph of that page, Weeks says that one of the the chief accounting for differences in fertility from one population to next, they're accounted for by, from Bongaarts' standpoint, only four variables. Proportion married, assuming that there is only marital fertility, which we know that there is not. But generally, fertility is in the context of marriage, although we'd have to say in recent times less so. But anyway, proportion married, use of contraceptives, the calculus of choice, incidence of abortion, and if there are no contraceptions that can control fertility, then there may be situations, numerous situations, where the total fertility rate is controlled by abortion of one sort or another. So think about how that might be the case, and breastfeeding practices, which I mentioned yesterday in the email. Breastfeeding creates a space and a fecundity, I can say the word, and the ability to conceive of a woman. And so if there are extended breastfeeding periods, then that extends the interval between births. Remember that if you think of the Hutterite, that on that one, it's in here somewhere, that it's a figure that shows, I can't see it right now, but you'll know which one it is, where the age-specific fertility rates are very high for the Hutterites. That's that's no method, perhaps rhythm method, but basically having a baby as often as one can, not so much intentionally, but just having a baby from the moment of ability to have babies till the end and menopause. And step back for a moment and think. I'm always mindful of this. It seems like fertility is defined by the reproductivity of women, or social contextual issues of women, and what about guys, right? And it is true that a lot of our understanding as demographers in fertility are biological features of women and the contextual influences on decisions that women make. And in a lot of countries, and perhaps even in our country, some ethnic groups, racial groups, the person in control of the number of children that a couple will have is the man. So that might be something that you want to think about. You can imagine, perhaps in your country, where we're in a more patriarchal society there, where men are more likely to be the ones who makes decisions about how many babies we have in this family. That's a calculus of choice, that even if there's contraception and he wants 7, then likely there will be an effort to have 7. So some of you may work your discussion around your